pay attention to more than just rational data. That's how you'll better understand your team. So what does this room feel like right now? The amount of knowing and learning and understanding, even if it's just to know what questions to ask. That one for me is a really big and quite a challenging one if you're not used to paying attention to those sorts of things. But pay attention to more than just the rational data that you can get.
Hello, innovation management students. Today I have the pleasure to be joined by Eli Rebeiro, and we are going to be talking about organizational change and organizational resistance from Eli's perspective. And Eli owns the organization Create Relate, and we're going to hear a lot about Create Relate. And really the focus here, from my understanding at least, Eli, is on dialogue, it's on discussion, it's on working with organizations, not just to understand a manager's perspective, but to understand the perspective of the whole organization to really create that ongoing sustainable change rather than just trying to do something quickly, but it doesn't actually stick. And you've got a huge roster of organizations that you've worked with, from the NHS to the MOD to Jaguar, BAE, King's University, huge amounts. And so really excited today just to hear your thoughts, your stories, and anything else on organizational change and resistance. So my first question is, how are you, and can you tell us a little bit more about Create Relate?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm really well. So Create Relate, it's really interesting when you hear someone else describe what it is you do. Create Relate is a small business. It's myself and my business partner. We set up together, having worked in a similar field before together. What do we do? So we work with organizations to support them with anything that involves change. But essentially, our ethos is that we believe that change will only happen through dialogue, through building of relationships, and through developing skills that are not often described when you think about management skills. So empathy, an ability to be aware and present to yourself, and be aware and present to others as well. So those are the things that we really believe, and we do that using visual methods. So visual methods can be used in many different ways. Some of you will be thinking probably now about capturing things live, etc. But the way we use them is very much as a tool for dialogue. So it's not about putting a picture up on a wall of a strategy and going, ta-da, now we know what we've all got to do. It's about using a visual tool to co-create a strategy together. So removing that level of the strategy is done by a management team at the top, you now all have to go and do it. It's now actually, if we are the ones that have to go and do it, we are integral in defining the strategy in the first place, because otherwise what you say may not work. So it's about bringing those together in one place, and using that to be able to talk about it and make sense of what it actually means on a lived experience. What am I doing today? How do I be part of this and make what we need to do as an organization work?
Amazing. And we'll put in some pictures of some examples of what that actually of what that looks like. But yes. I think it's just such a great concept, because what it does, it's almost, I'm going to use the wrong words for it here, but what I imagine it as is almost like a mediator. Like, it gives us something tacit to be able to focus on as everyone within that organization, as you say, rather than it just being something that's created behind closed doors over here. Actually, it's something that we can all feed into and then actually understand, because as you say, everyone has then helped to create that, or at least understand that, or provide context around that.
Absolutely. I think that it's often the case that organizations or managers will go out, do a roadshow, will go, ta-da, this is what we've got to do. Everyone will go, yeah, that makes sense. But we'll walk away and do not a single thing differently. If you've been involved in the process and your views and perspectives are validated and valid and incorporated, then it's no longer someone else's strategy, it's yours. It's embodied. You're going to live it rather than just ignore it, basically.
Yeah, for
So
sure. And it kind of that idea of the, moving away from that top-down programmatic transmission of ideas, because people, it's hard to buy into something that you're told, because you don't have, with the best will in the world, you could have the best top management team, but if you don't have the context for why these new things exist, they're kind of disembodied, aren't they? They're just ideas, rather than that team might actually have the information saying, this is why we're doing it, this is why it's important, this is why we need to do this in this particular environment. And actually just those sorts of, even, it's a bizarre thing, really, isn't it? We think about it, like, even the idea of having those conversations is actually quite a radical shift away from how things would be done normally.
yes, absolutely. Asking a senior team, or have you talked to people about this, and how do you know this is the right thing to do? So we will work with the senior team to start with, to kind of get the bones of what they perceive the strategy to be. This is just one lens. It's an important lens, of course, but it is just one lens. And you'll sort of say, well, how do you know that's the right thing to do? Sometimes that can't be answered because it's either gut, sort of intuition, or the decision has come from perceived or assumed reasoning. So to be able to connect that back to people that are actually doing the work, it brings in another lens. It brings in a different way of looking at that same thing. Or, as you said, there may be really good context, but if you've never had a conversation about it, no one understands why. And it's also really easy as well. So often they rely on comms departments. So the comms department will put the information out, but often that's just another form of tell, right? Because there's no way to come back and talk to someone and go, actually, I don't understand what you mean. So this communication, this need to talk all the time is so important. And even I appreciate that we all, within organizations, you kind of get email overload and there's just too much all the time. But actually, we're talking about just you and your leader, your manager, your senior person, just having a chat that goes, this is why, this is happening, this is why you wanted it, we've really been trying to listen to you, let's get it done. So it's really redefining what we mean by communication and talking in that situation.
Love it. And it's so important, isn't it? Redefining communication is, it comes away from just that waterfall and becoming more conversational, more of a dialogue. That idea of with all of your work, as long as we've known each other, the word of dialogue is on a Wordle. That would be the one that would be right in the middle. And it is a dialogue. It's not a unilogue. It's not one person saying something. It's this conversation back and forth. So in terms of the typical scenario that you might find yourself coming up against, is there any such thing as a typical scenario that you are going to be dealing with, or are they all different, or are there particular sort of clusters of types of change that you might see organizations that are maybe struggling with or looking for your input on?
If I say 3, can you remind me I've said 3?
100%. I'm writing it down right now.
And I'll double check that I'm even correct about that. So the biggest one is that the organization is going through a massive transformation of everything, right? So we're redesigning technical systems, we're redesigning our processes, we're rebranding, we're doing everything at the same time. That does often happen. It's slightly crazy, but it does often happen. The biggest challenge we come across is that they've kind of forgotten to bring people along at the same time. They'll do that afterwards. And I still scratch my head now when you go, really? Okay, this isn't going to work. People almost have to be on that journey before you change systems, before you change processes. Not that they need to be told about it, they need to be brought into why it's even happening, right? Because it's an even bigger challenge if down the line people are being inconvenienced by system changes, they're being inconvenienced by this, and their hearts don't get why on earth it's going on. So that is a big one for us, remembering that the people change is not some nice little add-on thing you just snack on at the end, or that you can design the organization and then design the culture separately. or afterwards. This real disconnect between the fact that this is all the same thing is a big challenge. So that's often one we get called in for. Another one is the people dissatisfaction point. So this is slightly different in the fact that we get sort of a company coming to us panicking because survey results are saying that their engagement is below what it should be. And that's quite interesting because firstly, you need to understand what an organization even thinks engagement is. It's anything within an organization. It can be anything from people don't know what's happening to really getting that hearts and minds piece that actually it's about us caring about our organization. One of the organizations we worked for, we went in and they were saying people don't give enough discretionary effort. And you're like, oh, okay. So what do you think discretionary effort means? Well, that they'll stay later or they'll do this. And I was like, okay, so why would you do that? Why would you? Because essentially what you're doing is you're saying, we're going to pay them for this amount, but what we really want is that extra third on top of them staying later. We're really annoyed. They're at the gates at the time that they're meant at 5 to 4 because they leave at 4. That means that they've left work early to get to the gate. And like, yeah, I can see that. But what do you think that is? Because essentially it's because, again, of this disconnect or this relational lack between leadership and employees. We can't even ask why you might be doing that, or and discretionary effort is not something that you aim to achieve. Discretionary effort is something that you're really blooming lucky to get from people that really, really like you and really, really want to do well for you. You can't go in with that as an aim. You can't go in with that as an intention. That's a really nice outcome.
It reminds me a little bit of when people say we're going to make a video and we want it to be a viral video. The idea of like, it's something that can happen as a result of doing all of these things right. But actually, that's not the aim. The aim is to make something that's successful rather than to aim.
Good.
Yeah.
Exactly. So at the moment, actually, our third one is about understanding complex situations, complex issues. So, for example, a project we're doing at the moment is around how to help an organization understand what data means. Now, you'd think that would be quite straightforward, but interestingly, it really, really isn't, because this is an organization that works with medical people. So actually, nurses and doctors, they work with data every single day. We all work with data every single day. When we make a decision, we're using data in a different, but we don't necessarily perceive it as data. What is perceived as data in their situation is numbers, tools, oh, I've got to use a computer. I don't like using computers, that kind of thing. Whereas actually data for this organization is fundamentally vital for their ability to understand and deliver what their members want. So to help people to understand and make sense of actually what the behavioral shift in that would be is it's certainly interesting for us, because it's not something that we've really considered before, and yet actually does form quite a big basis of the work we do. So when you think about data, and you think about data within your own body, what made you decide to do something? It was actually that felt experience. Well, how do you measure that kind of data, or how do you decide to use that over numbers and figures? And if you're going to do that, how do you connect those two things together? And how it's really interesting, especially when some data is more valid in perception than others. So that's a third one that's quite interesting and coming up for us at the moment.
Yeah, and with all of those, it sounds like there's lots of differences between those. There's some overlap between those, and some of that overlap, it sounds as though it's obviously there's, with the visual element, there's the conversations with everyone within the organization, that kind of holistic big picture about what's going on. But also a lot of this is about those conversations with managers, and you being there to ask those questions, and you being there to kind of help them to understand the situation, or less about telling them here's the way to do it, and more about enabling them to understand the situation through their lens. Would that be right? Or
I would agree that absolutely, yes, absolutely, Neil. I think that so we come under a category that I kind of wince when I say that we are consultants, because they've got a pretty bad rep. And there is that perception that we'll come in and tell people what to do, tell people how many people to get rid of, and, you know, do all those horrible things. So we often have to do quite a bit of relationship building when we get in there to start with, even with the people that hired us in to do the work, which is very interesting, because you would think when you've got sign off from a board of people that that group of people then are actually interested in what you have to say and what you're going to do. So, and that doesn't even get to the point where you're then going out and speaking to all employees throughout the organization. So however, the key thing that we do is we are there to listen and to understand and to better get a sense of that embodied experience of the organization itself, because that's the stuff they don't hear, they don't feel, they don't see. And it also then helps them to think through as a team. We try to do it so that they're thinking through as a team, because how they work together as a team is a micro environment of the organization. So we're helping them to work better together as a team for the betterment of all teams within the organization, if you like. But we're asking them questions like why is that important? You know, how do you speak to your people? What does engagement even mean to you as a team? You know, what's important for this organization, not on an intellectual level, but what's important in terms of in your heart. And that is really, it's really difficult for a group of people that have often been you know, taught to manage in an environment where that is not what we pay attention to, you know. So there's quite a big coaching and supporting element to the work we do, and we do end up creating kind of a bit of a nurturing environment. We have to be tough. We have to go, actually, what you're saying here is not appropriate to what we're to the essence of the project that you want to deliver. So we have to be tough, but we also have to recognize that it's so destabilizing asking a group of people that maybe have never had to use these skills, it's not always the case, but often is the case, to pay attention to how they speak, to what they say, to how they communicate, to not be directive, to not be controlling and commanding. You know, it makes you really vulnerable. And vulnerable is good, because that's where change happens as well. It's a really good thing, but it also needs to be supported. You can't be vulnerable in a place where you feel like you're going to be attacked or hurt or maimed. You know, you need to be vulnerable in an environment that is safe. So part of our role is to create that it's okay space. No, because most managers don't believe it's okay to be wrong. Not in the organizations we come to. It's taught. That's what we've taught. So it's not surprising.
Sorry, but everything we know about management, you know, from the origins of when management first becomes a verb, you know, it's that managers are omnipotent, managers know best, and those people may be in that position having internalized that. And what I find really, really interesting, you know, okay, so what we're talking about here is an intensely people-centric understanding.
Yes.
That requires an understanding, and it sounds as though your role in this is also helping people to understand their wider context, almost that kind of like series of questions to understand the context. If we can understand the context, then we can start to think about what the climate might be like for change. But underlying all of that is this idea of change is an emotional process.
Really emotional. Yes. No, absolutely, it's emotional, and therefore, you know, as leaders and managers, you're not the only ones going through that emotional process. You know, there is a real sense that change needs to be understanding, or the activity of change and the activity of people during change needs to be to support each other and to understand each other and to help each other through to get to something better. And if you've done the work at the beginning that allows you to go, we know this is what we want to get to, it's the same with anything you do in your life. If you know the thing that you're trying to achieve is worth achieving, you'll go through the pain to get there. You know, we will all do that. And, you know, the thought that we are different somehow in work to how we are at home is not true. I know we like to keep our lives separate, but we're still the same human being that goes to work with our issues from home and that comes home with our issues from work. We're the same person. So that level of recognition that actually it does matter at work what we're trying to achieve, because as humans we like to have meaning, we like to have purpose, and we like to know what we're doing. So another reason why it's so important to make sure those things are considered when change is being enacted, if you like, that actually it really, really matters. People aren't just sitting there doing their job waiting for the next thing to happen. They want to be involved.
So there's two elements that I'm curious in drilling down into even further, which is the managerial side of, you know, having these conversations with managers, and then also thinking a bit more about some of those issues, you know, talking about with your three elements, the transformation, all the dissatisfaction, those ones in particular, and thinking about what are some of the sources, causes, and ways that people might feel dissatisfied or might resist. So they're the two angles. To carry on with this idea about the managers,
oh yes,
and this, I was going to say reluctance. It actually doesn't sound like a reluctance. Perhaps just that issue of, you know, you go into an organization and these emotional contextual elements are things that managers may not have considered before or may find it difficult to engage with. What do you see as some of the sources of resistance from managers to that? Like, why does that exist? Why is it something that isn't a standard within management in 2022 that we accept these things? Why are we still holding on to those ideas of much more traditional approaches of the hard skills rather than the softer people skills?
Partly because that's how we describe them. I think that whilst you still have issues with diversity, you'll still probably have the same issues with how we perceive generally the right way to manage to be. And I think that so you said at the beginning of that bit, whether there's something that they haven't considered or whether there's something that they resist to, and I would say it's both. Often they haven't considered it because they were taught by people that didn't consider it, and therefore you've got that hand down of that, and it depends on the level of autonomy within the organization to step away from maybe the norm of how we lead. So you may see it not being quite right, but it's quite hard to move out of something when everyone else around you is managing in a certain way. I'm not sure how eloquent that was in where I put it, but the other thing is that it is resistance, and it is resistance for that reason that we said, that actually it's harder. It's harder. It's so much easier for me to make a decision here and go, actually, I've decided today what we're going to do. If I've got to ask people and I've got to try and make sense of what everyone's feeling, and that's just in my team, but now we've got a team of teams, so we've got to try and get a sense of all of that. It's so much harder. It takes longer. It's absolutely worth it, but it does mean that you've got to have thought about everything further ahead than you would like to, and it doesn't feel natural yet. It takes time for you utilizing those skills to feel like a natural thing to do. So the resistance is often to that it doesn't feel congruent with how people have manifest themselves as managers. So you're asking them to let go of a part of their construction of themselves and the construction of management in general. You've got that vulnerability. People don't like to be vulnerable. It's harder, it takes longer, and it's not everyone. So, and you're not trained to do it, right? That's the other thing. And I'm going to use training really loosely, because whether you can train somebody to be empathetic is something that we should come back to. But it's not part of our leadership development or our management development necessarily to consider these skills, right? Or you're considering them with a means to an end. You know, so if you're not if you're not taught or trained or supported in developing those skills, then how do you even know to do them in the first place? So that's the other challenge. It's not really a resistance, but it's an organizational resistance, because if at the top you recognize that it's important, but keep your leadership development very much horizontal, so around what we can train, and we've come from somewhere where we're really good at our tools, that's how we've had it described, but are really good at the job we do, but the only way to get more money, to develop, is to become a manager. We're not equipped in the first place to then manage people. We know the job really well, we don't know how to work with other humans really well. So I think I've kind of gone around the houses a bit, but that's another part of that challenge, the twofold, the resistance and the we're not developed to do it in the first place. And actually, if I'm really honest, that starts with school, right? That starts with how we pay attention to the things we're talking about. It would be much easier if we knew that from school onwards, the subjects and the things that help us with our empathy, our ability to understand other humans, our ability to think about the world differently, were valued as much as others. But they're not. So this continues all the way through, and we get to the point where we've got managers that, have no experience of anything different.
And it is, that's so right, because once we get to that stage, there's so many figures that go around of how many change efforts fail, and normally it seems to hover around the sort of like 70% mark. Huge amounts of change efforts fail. And with anyone that you ever speak to about when they've been in an organization, from the employee standpoint or from the managerial standpoint, everyone always comes back to the same thing. It's rarely that it wasn't a great idea, that it's rarely that was the problem. It was that people didn't go along with it because the people didn't feel like they were listened to, or people didn't feel like they were part of that change. People didn't buy into that change. People didn't commit to that change. It's the same thing time and time again. And what it's clearly not being answered by is those traditional top-down management skills, or in many situations it's not. So we have to ask different questions about how to do management.
We do, and we have to be really pragmatic and realistic about the state of affairs now. So, when we're creating our pictures, and we use the same model for how we ask our questions as well. We use something called the William Bridges model. It's not new. It's been around a bit, but it's really useful because it gets you to look at the context of now, what you want for the future, and how you connect those two things up in the middle. So what's the journey you're going to take to get there? We didn't know that. That's how we did things before. And then we found a model that went, oh, that's what we do. How useful. But what's interesting about it is that for us, the way we use it is we go, what's it really like now? Because when you get to there and you go, yeah, actually things are really not great right now. When you do those aha moments and you're not afraid of negativity, and you're not afraid to really understand some of the real deep underlying challenges that are prevalent or exist within your organization, then you know that the change that you're making, I'm pointing now because I'm on my model, in the future is the right path to take, is the right future to focus on. And therefore, if you know where you are, and you've had time to grieve, and you give yourself time to, the sessions we run are really cathartic. People talk to us about some things that really could almost be classed as trauma in a way through their organizational experiences. To be able to move on from where we are now, you really need to be able to unearth that and go, okay, that's it. That's where we are. We know we want to get to this, so let's work on it together. How is this going to work if we all do a bit of it? And what is that bit we can bring? So if you're always thinking, organizing, what am I doing for the organization? How is what I'm doing connected to that? How does that work in terms of me and my team? So when I'm thinking about myself within my team, what's that situation like? And therefore, what do I as an individual need to do differently? I've got my meaning and I've got my purpose, and it's cyclical because you go round and round and round it. But it means that you're always connecting those things together, which enables that change in those questions to be different. Like, why is it important? why do we really believe this is the right thing for our future? Do we really understand what our customers want? Even this is what our customers want. How do you know? Well, we just know. Have you asked them? No, we just know. Yeah, but how do you know that's what they want if you've never asked them? And that's the same. It's not just external customers. So if you think about an IT department, we worked with an IT department in a different organization, and they were redesigning what was required for the organization. And I was like, how do you know you're designing the right thing? And they said, well, but that's our skill set. That's what we know. I don't dispute that. And I'm not going to pretend I know, because this is not, I'm just the person that's going to ask the horrible questions that make it difficult for you. I totally respect your job, and I'm trying to draw things now that I'm really trying to get my head around. But you've got all these people out here within this organization, and you're creating something for them. How do you know that even like the interface, the way they're going to interface with it, is right? How do you know it's going to collect the right information? Well, we don't know that. Again, communication. Why are you not going out and talking to people? Yeah. And it's a really, again, and I partly blame technology in a way, an email, but it's something that we're getting out of the habit of doing, is just talking. And COVID has made that harder as well, because we're all now much more virtual. So you don't get those around the water cooler, the usual kind of metaphor, but you don't get those chats. So it's really, really hard to communicate people if you're never around them or with them, or want to pick up the phone and talk to people. And it's not something that all people are comfortable with. I totally understand that. But in some jobs, it's how we help people to develop those skills.
And we speak a lot on this module about the importance of building relationships, whether that's whether you're designing something, you're innovating something, you're inventing something that you want to put to market, or now in this part of the module we're talking about change management. And with both of them, the core thing that underlies everything is go and speak to people first to work out whether what you're doing is actually going to make sense in this current environment. If you don't do that, you have to be actually just really lucky for it to land, because you have to be really lucky that you had a good idea and that everyone else wants that idea. It's the kind of technology push method, and either that's because we've got a new technology, or just the idea of, it's an idea push method rather than needs pull. And in reality, I guess, in most situations, the best sorts of changes are going to come from a combination of those, as around what our skill set is, what do people want. But we cannot hope for change to be effective unless we understand the people that we're working with.
It's absolutely true. And I suppose one of the other key parts to the dissatisfaction piece we talked about, I know you said you were going to, you had your other hand there with another.
No, let's come over. Yeah.
Because, silos. We've got a siloed organization. Nobody talks to each other. Nobody knows what's going on. Well, in an organization where you're building something physical, so take maritime services, because they're building ships, and ships are a useful physical thing that people are building. Now, if you're creating something that's got to go in somewhere, it's got to do a certain amount of things, and you're not the one that's doing all of that. You are literally doing your bit and handing it over the wall to the next person if you're working in silos. Now, you may have had to make a change. You may have had to make a design decision. The part may no longer be available. There's so many reasons why you might have had to do something differently, or you might be delayed. You might be delayed because the person that passed it to you is delayed, But if that wall exists and there's no way to talk through it, right, then, and you choose not to talk through it, or it doesn't even occur to you to talk through it, then the next person on the other side of that wall is going to be pretty irritated, right? And so you can see this wall getting thicker and thicker and thicker, because we don't know why, but it's late, and oh, isn't it typical of them? So now you've got this narrative, right, made out of assumptions, because we never talked in the first place. So now we're assuming that that person on the other side of the wall is horrible, doesn't respect you, doesn't understand you, is deliberately sabotaging the process. I don't know. There's many ways you could think about it. But they're also doing that to the people that did pass them the piece all the way through this chain. And you can imagine by the time you get to the end and the piece is created and it's not fit for purpose because it's now a different shape, it's a different, and it won't fit where it was meant to fit. And then you've got to start again. So now you've got organizational impact, which is we're now really delayed. It's going to cost us more money because we've got to start the process again. And that's just the organizational knock on. You've now got silos that are so much bigger now that each time it's going to get even harder, right? So from a relational perspective and from a people perspective of the change or of any just of working with an organization in general, if you don't communicate, then we make up the narrative, we make up the stories, we make up our perceptions of each other, and they're usually really, really wrong. Really, really wrong, but they're the best we've got because we've never spoken to the person, so we don't know. So yes, so silos is a big example.
The organization becomes even more small p political in that different people have different assumptions. The historical elements then become this, rather than becoming an enabler of change, they become a block to change, which I assume as well is something that managers rarely see or pay as much attention to. What has happened before us now, because that's actually going to define the ground on which we're on now, about how much work we have to do, or the types of work that we have to do,
and how are we embodying that past ourselves, because in this there would be potentially an assumption that we as managers are not doing that. It is somebody else, it is this team that are doing that, it is not us, it is the team. And actually that's or it's not even our team, it's someone else's team, which is even better. But it's recognizing how we play out in those, how those stories play out through us, right? Because we've worked with senior teams where when we've started, there's been quite a lot of animosity, just trying to agree a strategy. And if there's animosity between the senior team members who run teams, that is going to manifest all the way down through. It just is, by the language that is chosen to be used, the way that they talk to each other. There's so many ways that then plays out throughout the organization. So there's a responsibility as a manager, I believe, to recognize that past and where we've come from and that history of how things have been, but also to really use the team of managers that you work with as that microcosm of the organization. Because if all you have to do is look at your 6 or 7 other managers of your, that management team to go, oh, hang on, okay, so if we work better together, perhaps we'd start doing some of that unpicking of these silos that we've talked about, and we'll be more understanding of each other's perspectives. And oh, look, that will actually then play out through our teams, because we are now more generous, more caring, more understanding of each other's challenges. And no manager is without their challenges, right? It is a tough job. We take on a management role and it's hard. You've got to make tough decisions. There are still some decisions that managers obviously have to make and they're responsible for. And we've now asked them to think differently about how they behave, about how they respond to people. And people are not always easy. We have to be realistic about that. No matter how well you communicate, managing people is a tough gig. And you also have to think about how you are expected to report as well. So our reporting often doesn't mirror what we want to have happen in terms of people change, and often create some of that resistance, because you can build up this really great kind of cultural environment in a space, and then the reporting almost undermines what you've created, because they go, that's great, but you're late, you need to do this, we need to do that, and suddenly you've got your head back down and it can rip the carpet away. So there is something about considering how people change, how the people elements of change also deeply connects to some of our processes that we use, right? It's not, you can never take it out on its own. It's always so interwoven, I think, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, the culture isn't a variable. It's not just it's not one part. It's not like on a where
Yeah.
you make like electric circuits that you can just say, right, I'm going to take that part out, and today I'm going to put structure in, and then
Yes,
tomorrow I'll put
exactly.
emotions in, and now it's going to be culture. It's that these things are all, and all an organization is a collection of people, and when a collection of people come together, those people will form some sort of culture or cultures. Your word of silos is so evocative, and it so effectively summarizes what organizations feel like, are these little silos with their own sense making. But yeah, so organizations, collection of people create cultures, and when we have these multiple cultures, we then have the organization becomes political, and managers' job is then to navigate the politics of an organization, and to navigate the resistance that comes out of it. What sort of resistance do you see? We've spoken about a few bits and pieces. What sort of resistance is kind of typical forms, or managers that would say, oh, my employees do this, or we see this, or we want to get rid of this? What's kind of typical resistance?
So before we come in, I suppose, okay, so let's start there. So before we come in there, it's like not getting involved in it at all. So just stepping back and not playing with the change at all. We had a situation where they basically trashed the place because they were really unhappy with what was going to be happening.
Literal sabotage.
Physical sabotage. Just leaving is the biggest one, right, for change. So you get a higher attrition rate. Often employees play up less than managers, I'm not going to lie.
Wow. Okay.
It doesn't the experiences of employees are much more brutal than the experiences that managers have. So therefore, the stories that I can tell you about how change has damaged employees, the experiences that they've had of poor management. But resistance to change generally just comes in the world of, I'm not playing it, I'm not getting involved, I'll carry on using my systems, even though you've told me that this information management system is really, really important. I'm not going to do it, I'm going to keep going with what I want to do. Or they look at it and go, nah, I'm out. And actually, that's a really strong one, because it's so expensive to keep employing people. So it's the strongest power that employees have, is to stop being employees in a way, is to choose to walk away. For me, the experience of change is more around like trauma and sadness and really difficultness if it's not done right. That's what it comes down to. There's not We're not in a world of as much where it's a world of rebellion and strikes and people really sabotaging offices and and resisting in those sorts of ways. It is much more about, we're decent human beings, we want to do a really good job, but you're making us do too much, you're putting too much on us. Look at any strike that's happening, look at the strike with the nurses at the moment. It's usually because you've got to the point where the things are unacceptable, they cannot be coped with on a human level anymore. We don't strike intellectually. we don't do those things. They're the emotional pull of too much.
And again, and as we start to kind of round up here, because we're kind of circling around to those issues that we spoke about right at the start,
Yes.
with managers, about reframing those understandings and circling and pulling in all of the themes that we've spoken about, and that idea of the emotional journey. Change in it's a lovely quote about always involving an uncomfortable emotional repositioning, and whatever change happens, that is inevitable. Whatever happens. It's always going to involve a loss, and that's not necessarily a material loss, but that's a loss of identity, it's a loss of sense of self, it's loss of whatever, a loss of just your routine. There is uncertainty, there is loss, and therefore that is what we need to understand. It needs to be, rather than it just being changed as a rational process. Okay, you can change the most rational of processes and people will still respond in this emotional, irrational way. And that's not pathological. That is a natural response to change and to lack and to loss. And these are the key managerial skills. So my last question is around, it's a big question, but if you're then thinking around, okay, what are some of the key bits of advice then for managers if people have kind of been through this, or that are just watching the shortcut snippet to saying managerial behavior could or should look like this? What are some of the real key cornerstones of that where you think this is what new managerial work could or should look like?
Pay attention to more than just rational data. That's how you'll better understand your team. So what does this room feel like right now? You know, the amount of knowing and learning and understanding, even if it's just to know what questions to ask. That one for me is a really big and quite a challenging one if you're not used to paying attention to those sorts of things. But pay attention to more than just the rational data that you can get. You know, it's the same as the age-old question: how are you? I'm fine. Great. They've said they're fine, and I'm off. You know, does it really feel like they're fine, or are they just saying that because there's something else? So pay attention to more than just the data. Take time to understand your team. You don't have to like everybody. This is not a best friend contest. This is not what I'm talking about. This is, often that's what the drama we get into is, I don't want to be everyone's best buddy. This is not the point. You have a responsibility as a manager, right? It's not about that. But you can really empathize when someone has a loss. You can really empathize when someone, because you've maybe lost something. It's about how do you take the time to understand your team, what makes them tick, because you get the best out of people when you're not thinking about how to get the best out of people. Right? Just because you know them better and you give them the opportunity to volunteer for the things that they know are their strengths, right? So that's another really important point, I think. And take the time when you're going through change and transformation to deal with that loss bit that we're talking about, right? To recognize and name it, because it's the same as we are about loss, I think, everywhere in certainly in the UK, is that we go through a loss and then we go back to work. When do we take the time to mourn that thing that we have lost? And it may seem like a silly thing to mourn, but actually, if it's what made you feel safe and secure, then it's really important. So that's part of the change process. That's the bigger recommendation, that if you're going through change, allow that time to mourn for kind of that bit, and name the challenges, and ask better questions. Not just ask questions, right? That would be another one. Don't go in with, this is what we've got to do, this is what I think. Your perspective should come last, right? And should be founded on all the evidence and the knowledge that you've just gained from this great group of people that you employed to work for you. So, what do you think we should do? Why is this important? Open questions are one of the biggest things that we do in training, and everyone goes, yeah. We know how to do that. We know what they are. Of course we do. I help people to ask better questions. And yet I know with my own children and my own family, I am still prone to a double question every now and again, more often than not, my husband would say, or, or the closed questions, or me going into control mode. It's really easy to go back to what we know or what we've learned. So just ask more questions, be curious, be interested in what perspectives people have, because that's how you'll find out better what actually the collective are capable of.
Ellie,
Good.
Thank you so much for your time, for your insights, for your thoughts, for your generosity with those thoughts as well. Because I know, for so many of our students going into these sorts of industries is going to be something they're really interested in. So to actually hear that and to hear your insight about it firsthand is so valuable. And where can anyone find out more about you, about Create Relate?
So we've got this. I feel like I'm on Strictly. Okay. So our email address, our website is www.createrelate.com. That's CRE8 rel8.com, because we couldn't keep it simple. And and that's our website. Or yeah, I'm happy for you to share my email details as well if people want to ask more questions, or have anything that they want to talk about with their project work. I'd be very happy to do that. Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing.
It was a joy as always to talk to you as well, Neil. You know how much fun I have with our conversations.
Most definitely. And thank you so much, and we'll look forward to chatting soon.
Good. Okay. All right. Take care.
See you, Ellie.
Bye.